This session is being hosted by the Piarco Church of the Nazarene, joined by Camuto Church of the Nazarene, as well as the San Fernando Church of the Nazarene. Our facilitators are from Langham Preaching, Sister Angela and Brother Lindsay. We thank you for facilitating this program for us. Before we go into the study, just a reminder, we want to see who people are while we're going through this study. So those of us who are on Zoom, we ask if you could at least put a picture. I know it may not be possible for everybody to do so tonight, but when you're joining on, at least keep a picture up so we would have a face to the voice that we're hearing. For those who are doing a comment on YouTube or by messaging me directly or Brother Minister Daryl McKenzie directly, and we would try to facilitate your questions here in the Zoom chat. So at this time, I want to turn over to Sister Angela and Brother Lindsay as they would lead us in this study.
Hi, good night to everyone.
Good evening.
Jonathan, is this the first time it's going to be on YouTube, or you've been doing that before?
No, actually, it's been on YouTube since we started. It's just with a discussion with Minister Daryl recently, we've realized that we possibly having more persons on YouTube than in the Zoom itself, because the YouTube is the easier app to work with.
Yeah.
So more people are leaning towards that.
Right. You must send me the links, Daryl. Okay? I haven't seen it on YouTube. All right? Okay, thank you. Let me go here. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay. So today is week 6, and we are looking at marriage matters again, finishing chapter 7. And we're even going to go on a little into chapter 8, if we get a chance. So, marriage matters in light of the crisis. So this is what we had last week. We started chapter 7, and we did verses 1 to 16. So Paul spoke chiefly to the married there, or the ones who were formerly married. He's answering their question in their letter, or their issue that they raised about whether or not it is good for man to. It is good. It is not good. It is good for man not to touch a woman. That was their issue. So Paul addressed that one, and he said, "You all seen the little pointer, my pointer, little pointer on the screen, like pointing out to chapter 7."
Yes, we are.
Yes, we have seen it.
Okay, a little arrow, right? Okay, I wasn't sure if that's only for me. Hi, Joycelyn. I heard your voice.
Yes, I'm right here with Arnold.
Okay. So this is what Paul says. He says, no abstinence within marriage. And he says, for those who were married and widowed or divorced, either singleness or marriage. And he says, no divorce for Christian partners, and no divorce for mixed marriages either, except when unbeliever departs. So now we're going to go on to the rest of chapter 7, and the first section here, verses 17 to 24, I will do, and then Lindsay will talk about the rest. So this is the guiding principle: stay as one was when called. And then Lindsay will go on to this, which talks about to the unmarried now. He's going to say singleness is preferred, but marriage is not a sin. That's what they were saying. Marriage is a sin in light of all that was going on. Okay, so he's going to say singleness is preferable, and he's going to give his reasons. Says no divorce for Christians, right? Their reason for wanting to remain single is that they thought that sexual relations was in marriage was kind of like would humbug their spirituality, right? They were so spiritual that they didn't want to engage in sex during marriage. So Paul gives his reasons now for singleness, and it's not based on any of those aesthetic reasons. He's going to mostly say the time is short, and he's going to re-emphasize, however, that marriage is not a sin. So the first section, stay as one was when called. Could we have somebody read verses 17 to 24 for us?
Sister Namala, would you be able to read for us? Yeah, I'm not getting on to Sister Namala.
Okay, I will read it. Okay? Pastor
Yes, Sister-
Jonathan?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, Sister Joyce, and go ahead.
Chapter 7, verse 17. But as God has distributed to each one, as the Lord has called each one, so let him walk. And so I ordain in all the churches. Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. But keeping the commandments of God is what matters. Let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. Were you called while a slave? Do not be concerned about it. But if you can be made, for he who is called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freed man. Likewise, he who is called while free is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brethren, let each one remain with God in that state in which he was called.
Right. So just to recap a little, after being saved, some Corinthians wanted to change their present married status as they saw celibacy as being more spiritual. So Paul advised them to remain as they were. If they were married, remain married. Now, Paul now says that they should also remain in this. God called them to be in, God's call to be in Christ transcends those settings, and we'll understand what that means. They must remain in the same social settings. So they are to live out their Christian lives in the situation, or it says calling, in which God called them. So the principle then, he's going to apply it using circumcision and slavery as examples. But in the case of slavery, however, there is going to be an exception. So we need to understand this calling and call. The theme of calling is central to the argument. How many times called or calling is called here, called. I think it's the same word in the King James, right? Calling, they use call and calling. So central to the argument. So what do we mean by God's call? So God calls people to be in Christ. We met that in chapter 1, verse 9. This is basically a way of describing your conversion. Calling in Christ, and we'll read that a little while again 1:9 to see its conversion. But that call came to a person in a given social setting. And it renders the setting irrelevant. So the change of setting is not necessary. However, if change does take place, that too is irrelevant to the call. That is what Paul is going to be saying here. So we try to understand that some more. Let's take verses 17 to 20 first. So, nevertheless, each one should retain the place in life that the Lord assigned to him and to which God has called him. This is the rule I lay down in all the churches. Was a man already circumcised when he was called? He should not become uncircumcised. Was a man, Lindsay was asking, how does that happen? Was a man uncircumcised when he was called? He should not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing. Uncircumcision is nothing. Keeping God's commands is what counts. Each one should remain in the situation in which he was in when God called him. So Paul is saying here, this nevertheless goes back to verse 15. What was the verse 15 again? What does verse 15 say?
Says, but if the unbeliever leaves, let him do so. A believing man or woman is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace.
Right. So this nevertheless, in verse 15, Paul gave an exception if the unbeliever leaves. But basically, he is going to be saying here the exception is not the rule. So nevertheless, and he repeats, each one should remain in the situation, in the place in life that God has assigned him. So the nevertheless ties back to the exception given in verse 15. Nevertheless, the exception, which is to change, is not the rule, right? That's what he's saying. What is the place? What do you think the place in life that the Lord has assigned him to? What do you think God, Paul is talking about here? Each one should retain the place in life that the Lord assigned him and to which God has called him. What would be that place in life? Anyone? I mentioned it earlier. So, the place in life that the Lord has assigned you to is your social status. Paul is talking about his social status here. What is the word? Well, how does the King James say this? Each one should retain the place in life of the Lord. Joyce, and you are reading from the King James?
Verse 17.
Verse 17,
But as
yeah.
God has distributed to each one, as the Lord has called each one, so let him walk. And so I ordain in all the churches.
Well, anyway, the place in life that the Lord has assigned to you is your social status. This is what Paul is talking about here. And the calling or the call is the conversion. And let's go back to chapter 1, verse 9 to see that the meaning of this word calling. Chapter 1, verse 9. Anybody read?
Go ahead.
Right, so that calling into the fellowship with his son, that's conversion, right? So the calling is your conversion. So he's saying here, each one should remain in the place wherever God saved him. And that is the rule he's laying down in all the churches. But it does not mean, however, that one is forever locked into that setting. But he's saying one should live their Christian life in that setting. And this is the rule that he's laying down in the churches. So whichever situation you were in when God saved you, it doesn't mean necessarily because you are saved, you must come out of that situation. So I say, even if you're in jail when you were saved, you can live out your Christian life in jail, not so. Yeah? Yeah. So, then he goes on in verses 18 and 19. Was a man already circumcised when he was called? He should not become uncircumcised. Was a man uncircumcised when he was called? He should not be circumcised. So these are the things Paul is talking about. And remember circumcision. What was circumcision a sign of in the Old Testament?
It was a sign of the covenant.
It was the sign of the covenant. So this was a really big thing. And Paul is saying here, as we did when we were studying, what is it we did?
Hebrews.
The law.
Grace law.
From grace from law to grace. Yeah. He saw circumcision. He's saying, what does Paul say about circumcision in verse 19?
It is nothing.
Yeah, it's nothing. It's irrelevant to God. So Paul is illustrating his principle with circumcision, which was the sign of the covenant. He's saying there is no need to do or undo circumcision when you're called. Circumcision and circumcision is now completely irrelevant to God. We're in the new covenant. And what counts is obedience to his will. And we saw that in Galatians 5:6. It's not the works of the law that counts, but obeying God's will in Jesus Christ and all that he has laid down for us to follow. So then, he repeats. He's really knocking this. Each one should remain in the situation which he was in when God called him. Live out your life in that situation. Please God in that situation. Your life is in God's hand. If he wants to move you out, he will move you out. So now let's go on to another example, and we see if there's any applications here for us. And this example is now with slavery. In verses 21 to 24, he says, were you a slave when you were called? Don't let it trouble you. Although, if you can gain your freedom, do so. For he who was a slave when he was called by the Lord is the Lord's freedman. Similarly, he who was a free man when he was called is Christ's slave. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. Rather, should remain in the station God called him to. So now as he goes on to the example of slavery, does he say the same thing? Were you a slave when you were called? Does he say the same thing as for circumcision? Let's go back and see what he said for circumcision. He says, was a man already circumcised when he was called? He should not become uncircumcised. So think Paul is saying the same thing here with slavery? Were you a slave when you were called? Is he saying you should not? Is he saying stay in that position? What do you think? Anyone? No, he's not. Instead, he sympathizes and he says, don't let it trouble you. And he says, if you can gain your freedom, do so. Right? So, however, he goes on to explain that the principle is the same thing. So, Paul is using now the example of a slave. He doesn't say in this undesirable state to stay as you are, but he tells them, don't let it trouble you. If you can gain your freedom, do so. So the principle is the same, and this is what he's saying. Neither slavery nor freedom counts anything to the one who is called into fellowship with Christ. Your salvation, your calling to Christ transcends, it's above your status in life. And he goes on to explain why. He says, for he who was a slave when he was called by the Lord is the Lord's freedman. Right? So, and he says, he who was a freeman when he was called, yes, he's still the Lord's freedman, but he's Christ's slave. So you're seeing a reversal there. So whether you're free or you're slave to Christ, that status is irrelevant to your salvation. So the slave called to Christ is God's freedman. Neither slavery nor freedom counts for anything to the one who's called. The slave called to Christ is God's freedman and can serve God. Even in that situation, he can serve God. We have the example of Philemon, right? Onesimus, his slave, how useful he proved to be. And he goes on to say in verse 23, you were bought at a price. Not only the slave, but the freedman too. They were bought at a price. So they are God's slaves, Christ's slaves, and should not become slaves of men. That now, even in a situation with slavery, they should see themselves as God's slave. So the slave was purchased with a price, and we know that price, it's Christ's blood, and gained freedom from bondage to sin. So this slavery and this freedom here, it's freedom from bondage to sin. So the one who is unsaved is a slave of sin, but the one who is saved is freed from that bondage to sin. Similarly, the free man now, the one who was free, he's still a slave. He's Christ's slave. Well, what we have to understand here is slavery in the Greco-Roman day was not the deplorable trade, and this week we are seeing still rung of the social ladder, yes, but basically slaves were mostly well cared for. Some of them even wanted to remain with their masters when they were free. Yeah. But as far as salvation is concerned, then a person's status, slave or free, is irrelevant. So we're really seeing that the ground is level at the foot of the cross, whether you're Jew, Gentile, black, white, freeman, slave, what else? Man, woman, everything. The ground is level at the foot of the cross. And then Paul concludes this section again with his abiding principle. Brothers, each man, as responsible to God, should remain in the situation God called him to. So we are to remain with God in whichever state he called you, as King James says. So that's his principle. Any applications for today we can see from these verses? Or any questions or any applications?
I'm looking at I was going to ask basically, since I was saved at the age of 8, was I supposed to remain unmarried? But I think you did address that earlier.
No, we're coming on to that now. Earlier, we addressed the married folk. So this is what we're coming on to now, to the unmarried.
Okay. And I'm looking at the topics, and it's two topics that we may not want to address as Christians today. Circumcision is something that we tend to just skim over, as well as slavery, because they can be topics that can lead to a lot of argument and falling out. But we tend to just brush over them and not deal with them in depth.
Yeah.
So it's not like last week where we were talking about some of the things in marriage. We had everybody conversing, and what we're coming to here with the virgins, with everybody conversing. So I expect we might have more people talking in the next few verses.
Understood. Yes. Yeah. So this is what I said. Paul is not saying that we should not seek to better ourselves, right? But what he is saying is that status is ultimately irrelevant with God. Your status, God is not looking at that, right? And we should not put stock on it. God is not judging you based on your status. He's judging you based on you have come to him and you are free from sin and you are saved. And so we must live out our calling in whatever situation we are in until we find out maybe God has a plan that he's clearly revealing to us, and we continue seeking to better ourselves, but knowing that our status is ultimately irrelevant to God. Right? Everybody agrees with that?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Great.
Sister Angela, could I make a comment, please?
Sure.
I was thinking in the same context of that, a couple of verses you were speaking in terms of status and all of that. Paul writes in the book of the Philippians in chapter 3, and from verse 8, he says, "Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing words of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord." So what I kind of glean from this and the discussion so far, when we are really establishing Christ's status and irrelevant, the surpassing knowing of Christ isn't than anything else.
Right.
Just a comment.
Very true. All those things are considered dung. Paul considered them. Okay, so we go on to the rest of chapter 4 now with Lindsay. Lindsay, you can control it.
Okay. So the next few verses would take us to the end of chapter 7, right? It's a long passage. I suppose we can take it in chunks, just for time's sake. So let's take, what is it about? It's about the virgins, for example. So Paul, he now moves to the topic of virgins. And he's likely referring to those who are engaged to be married. A Corinthian term suggesting that these days those who are engaged to be married, it would be a bit presumptuous to assume that they are virgins. I mean, but that was synonymous with virgins, right? The one who was engaged to be married. And so the question was whether the couple should go through with it after being saved or not. And that became a significant question in the context of what they were going through. And it was likely, that question was likely generated from the same ascetic, pronouncing that word badly, but you know, that self-denying life that was saying that you were spiritual, it was probably coming from that stance. So you remember the question in verse 1, is it good for a man not to touch a woman? It is good for a man not to touch a woman. So that whole philosophy is impacting the guy who was going to get married before he was saved, and now he's saved. And so the thinking at the bottom line, at the base of that, when you get down to brass tacks on that issue, they're seeing marriage as something not so spiritual, and maybe even sin. Okay, so Paul, as you will see, favors celibacy, but not for the same reasons that they are giving. And it's important that he makes the distinction, lest he appears to be endorsing their folly, right? So his advice to those already married is stay as you are, but it does not hold in this situation. If you're about to be married, you become a Christian, don't stay. He's not saying to stay as you are. That recommendation does not apply in this case. And another question, and what if the man was attracted to a celibate life, but not the young woman? You get saved, and this guy has this kind of a lean towards a celibate life, but not the woman. His fiancé. So Paul gives his theology and cautions that his opinion, he's saying, look, these opinions are not directly from the Lord, but they are very trustworthy. And he ventures an opinion that marriage is it's an alternative, and it is not a sin. And he's being quite emphatic in saying that. And he builds that, he makes 3 points to develop that argument. In verses 25 to 28, he's saying that I'm saying it is better to stay as you are generally. In the light of the present crisis, it is good for them to remain as they are. That whole remaining as you are issue, he's saying in the light of the present crisis, it'd be good if you stay as you are, but marriage is not a sin, so you may get married. And Paul also gives his reason for his preference. He says the time is short. We'll see that. Okay, so we'll discuss it a little bit. And he says that both options are open. Celibate, to stay celibate. To chapter 7, by giving some, he says that marriage is for life. The same options are open to the widow, but she can only remarry if the guy is a believer, right? So let's just read verses 25 to 28. And since Angela is always picking on people, I'm going to pick on her to read for us verses 25 to 28.
Okay. It says, now about virgins, I have no command from the Lord, but I give a judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. Because of the present crisis, I think that it is good for you to remain as you are. Are you married? Do not seek a divorce. Are you unmarried? Do not look for a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. But those who marry will face many troubles in this life. I want to spare you this.
Right. So, okay. So things get a little interesting now. So what is Paul's advice to virgins or those who are engaged to be married or something like that? What is he saying? Verses 25, 26. What's this thing? Go, Jonathan.
You want to answer that?
Okay, so basically, his advice and why is in verses 25 26. Say, look, to stay as they are, because he gives a rationale of the present crisis. Now, for example, you get a job, right? You're planning to have a child, and that job now takes you to another place, and so you're going to have to address the issue of a house and a whole lot of things. You may be well advised to postpone having that child. And so there was an existing crisis, and it was advisable, not based on right or wrong, but on experience, stay as you are because of the present crisis. And so that is his justification for the recommendation he's making. But people must not think, not even for a moment, that marriage for them was anything wrong, which was in becoming part of their thinking. You know? And he's saying that, it's not a command, but he believes that it is also inspired by the Holy Spirit. And because it appears in the canon of Scripture, the advice is counted as inspired by the Holy Spirit, that advice that he gave. It's not a command, stay as you are for the engaged because of the crisis that was around, but it's an option. Verses 25 and 26. And what was the crisis? You may need a little insight into that. Angela, what do you think? What do you say?
Well, I think there were two. Well, one, he says the time is short. So Paul's whole outlook was Christ could return at any moment, which is how we should all be looking at life, really. So, and what is expected before Christ's return? Jesus spoke about it. What was just expected before his return? A lot of trial and suffering, tribulation. So Paul is saying, in light of that, you better stay as you are, or else it might be harder for you. You get married, you have children, and these tribulations come.
Some sufferings. So in the context of that, if you can, mash brakes, right? So Paul advised them to stay as they are, but it was not a command. So that they had to do that in order to please God. And the whole big issue here is how do we deal with these decisions before us in such a way that we please God? And so his answer is well thought of, but it's not a command, as if to imply that if they got married it would be a sin or wrong. You got that? Yeah? So he repeats to the married, do not seek divorce, and to the unmarried, do not look for a wife. But he immediately qualifies that by saying, getting married is not a sin, as it was already part of their psyche and thinking. So he had to emphasize that getting married is not a sin. And he is only saying this to spare them of the troubles of the crisis. So let's hear some thoughts there.
Well, one of the things, so these were actually people who were engaged to be married, and that the current have to call them virgin, he's using their language. So basically, he's telling them the better thing in this crisis is not to go ahead with the marriage, but that if you get married, it's not sin, and we'll see that in the next section.
Yeah. I can't remember where I passed, and I think it might have been Tunupuna, but I saw a brand new eating place that was opened just before this lockdown. And I feel so sorry for the person that opened that business because their investment would just die in a month or two, because they'll have to sustain the rent, they'll be getting no money, and what a terrible thing. So I want to say that put his advice under the category of pastoral concern. He's just giving them good pastoral advice in the light of the circumstances.
Something like we actually knew some people who was supposed to get married in May.
Yeah.
In fact, of the COVID-19.
Yeah. And now it's postponed for next year. So they better hope that nothing else happens. You know? Or get married and forget about the big wedding, you know? So, and Paul now, he gives his reason. Let's hear a couple comments or observations or even a question from the floor. Yeah.
I'm thinking, I'm looking at the current scenario where there is a perception that, you know, for women, firstly, that they feel incomplete when they're not married. And it is the pressure, probably, the social order, that how we were nurtured or socialized, that it is expected that you get married. And there's a tendency to make very unwelcome remarks to women who are not married, particularly when they are professionals and hold professional jobs. Being a professional myself and being married, I've had to deal with comments from male professionals about their own perception of where a woman's place is, and also with colleagues who are females and are not married. And it is a very real situation that we have to deal with. And for the Christian woman, I think the clarity that is being presented here is really very good. Likewise for males, you know, you hear comments being made that once you rate that you must be married, and you know, they would make statements like, why do one get a wife? I'm simply saying that it seems as if in our church today, you have churches that actually have ministries to ensure that men and women get married in the church. It is pursued vigorously. I was in the States at some time, and they were having all these conferences and ensuring that the women must be single and the men must be single, and that they had to come together. And the intention is that at the end of the day, that relationships would be formed. Why is that, despite the fact that Paul has written this, and yet we see that even among the church, and I speak universally, there's this still strong perception of the need for women that they must get married, or men must get married, or they must have children, etc. I would like to hear your comments.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Joyce, and I think when we do the next section, you'll see, because Paul is going to give his reasons for singleness. And if your reason for wanting to be single is that so that you can serve God with undivided attention, Paul's really saying that is the best thing. But if you want to get married, I'm not promoting singleness for professional reasons. But if it is that you feel that you would be able to devote your life fully to God instead of husband and children, I think that is still a very noble thing, and it should be encouraged. But marriage also is an option.
Honorable, good thing. And Joycelyn, what you touched on there is really society shouting its recommendations. And it gets into your psyche.
That's
so much
right.
so that a lot of the nice young people that you see unmarried and fruitful in the work of the Lord, they sometimes, they wouldn't talk about it, have low self-esteem, or they feel damaged goods, which is far from the truth. And if we let Paul's words sink into our souls, we could be single and happy like Papi and fulfilled. I do really sincerely believe that.
I agree with that. Yes.
Opportunity for more comments, Lindsay?
Sure, yes.
All right, concerning this crisis. It's something I had checked on before, and there seem to be varying views. One of the references is used, it's the same book, chapter 4, when Paul is referring not to judge anything until Christ comes. And there's a hint of parousia, an early hint also. And because we remember that was an issue with the church at Thessalonica.
Yes, Thessalonians. Yes, good point.
The parousia. And the question of the persecution, the biblical historical records shows no evidence of that occurring at that time. It came after the fires in Rome. So it more points to this view that the return was imminent.
Yeah, and that's a big subject right there, because some people believe Paul might have been wrong to some degree. So that's a big subject.
That's how we should be living our life.
You know, one of the hallmarks of a truly committed Christian is that he's waiting expectantly on the return of the Lord.
Yes.
And so there is, So let's see what his reasons for his singleness. So chapter 7, verses 29 to 35. Somebody.
Before we move on, Sister Sharon, were you trying to say something earlier?
Sharon.
Yeah, yes. Just before the baby starts back,
Yes. Go again. I repeat.
All right. So my comment would have been and it was just to say that at the time. So he was more, in my opinion, addressing the situation. He was speaking to those that are unmarried.
Say a last sentence again.
He was addressing the people at the time with the crisis. He was addressing that situation. He was speaking more to situation than it's the rule across the board.
Yeah, he was addressing singles, not married.
Right.
Unmarried. Okay.
Right. And so go Jonathan.
Yes, before we move on again, just two questions came in from YouTube. Why will the people who marry face many troubles in life?
Does that come up? We're going to talk about. Let's talk. Yeah. That's good.
And the second thing was, if he, referring to Paul, is writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, then should we not listen?
That's a good point. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, because all scripture, the fact that it made it, is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect and thoroughly furnished unto all good works. So we should listen for our own good. But if he says it's not a command, that is part of listening to, he gives you some spiritual attitude. Because just remember, we're not robots and we still have a will and we have choice. And so if God gives you spiritual attitude, I mean that you have a part to play in that decision. Okay? That's why he says it's not a command. I think he gives you a little wiggle room.
What was the first question from the Facebook again?
Why the people who marry will face many troubles in life.
Okay, all right, yes. So again, that goes on to Paul expecting the Jesus' return any day, any time, and the great triumph, suffering, and persecution that was prophesied that would come. And so he's telling them this as a pastor. Hard times are coming. You might have to run for your life. So better not to
have a heavy load of responsibilities. Facing any kind of issue like that, it would be better if you had a freer hand, not have to run with a heavy load of, you name it, a large family, large responsibilities, lots of property, being a little less encumbered. Right. In the context of where all of this spirituality is taking us.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we that present crisis is not there today, but really and truly we should be living as though the time is short also.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yes.
And see Paul's reasons.
So let's see Paul's reasons. Somebody want to take those verses for us? Next set would be 29 to 35.
Okay, I will read 29 to 35.
Thanks, Jonathan.
What I mean, brothers, is that the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as if they had none. Those who mourn, as if they did not. Those who are happy, as if they were not. Those who buy something, as if it were not theirs to keep. Those who use the things of the world, as if not engrossed in them. For this world, in its present form, is passing away. I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of the world, how he can please his wife. And his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. I am saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way.
Yes. So Paul's explanation and gentleness, it comes in two parts, right? One, it's in the light of the short time for the existence of the world, and in its present state, he calls for a new understanding of their relationship to the world. When you were growing up, everybody wanted to be a doctor and to have a house and to have a big family. And he wants to get it in our system. We have a new worldview, a new eschatological expectation. And so let that be a factor in every decision you make as to whether you buy a second property, as to whether you have 5 children instead of 6, as to whether you get married at all. And I think that's a factor there. And in his case, he said, I will live without all of those things. Mm-hmm. Not even a property. And the second reason is he wants them to rethink their existence and their relationship with the world in terms of the shortened time, right? He wants them to be free from concern. So the first reason is there is a short time, is a whole new worldview that should impact every decision you make. And secondly, he wants them to be free from concern about the affairs of this world so that they might live an undivided life devoted to the Lord. Now, you ever realize that the young unmarried guys in church could stay later and pack up the equipment and put away the chairs without being told, oh gosh, hurry up now, there's a place called home, you know. So it can go really far, and it varies from circumstance to circumstance. But that whole life of concern changes, and you're freer for the Lord if you weren't married. In his case, he chose to be free from all those encumbrances. Sorry, ladies, for using that word. But I guess you consider the men an encumbrance as well at times, right?
No.
Okay, so verses 29 to 31, Paul wants them to think and to rethink their existence and their relationship with the world in terms of the shortened time left on earth, and to the certain future that would yet await the believer. There is nothing to change a believer's life like what he expects in the future. And how, if he thinks life is forever and ever, then you don't really live with the urgency that the Christian life that Christ has called us to. And some of that is right here in Paul's words as to why he was so efficient as well in living a life for God. And he uses 5 examples, and it's not really meant to be taken literally, but to make the point. And he says, the things that tend to control your existence and your time, compete for your time and so on, he says that they are passing away. And he names 5 things. So these things tend to be the things that you revolve around. One is marriage. One is rejoicing. Another is sorrowing. Another one is buying. And the other one is using. You know? So the Christian is marked by eternity. A big thing going on in the mind of a Christian is eternity. And it helps them to be free from what others are totally absorbed by. Do you know the depression people went through since they couldn't go to a mall? Right? And so marriage is one of those things like a mall, relatively speaking. People who couldn't go to a funeral, right? Because they were limited to 5. Sorrowing was like triple sorrow because be there, right? So rejoicing. Somebody's having a birthday party and you kind of can't wait for the 27th of August because that's the birthday party. Buying, you know, so many things that you want. I want a new circular saw. It will help me to cut wood and all of that. And also using. You just get so excited about driving a nice car. So those things, our whole existence tend to surround those things. And he wants our existence to be fueled by something else. A short expectation of the Lord's return, and also of the concern that bogs you down by being preoccupied with these things.
Yeah, but he's also going to say, if we're going to study these verses, it's not that. So the Christian is marked by eternity, and he's free from what others are absorbing. So you're still gonna buy, you have to buy a house, you're still gonna marry, whatever, but you're not doing this as the world is doing it, right? He does so as if not. If he's not, because he's focused on the future of Christ.
Yes. Yes. So and this is really so, even in marriages, is so important that you could say, okay, we have so many things to do home, but you hold the fort because brother so and so really needs my input on something he's going through. So you're married, but here you have to extend yourself. Somebody has to hold the fort while you're outside doing something in the Lord's work. So you're married, but you're living as though you weren't. Because I see a lot of couples, their marriage is so fruitless. When I say that, what I mean is all the fruit they produce, they consume it else. And I think that a good marriage has surplus to bless others. So you're married, but you live as if you don't. And the point is having, not being totally contained and bogged down by it, but you have life outside of it as well. Okay, so if we don't go on, sorry, we'll not get to the verse 40, which is we're at the brink of it. Verses 32 to 34. Paul wants them to be free from concern. The unmarried man, this is your question, and woman, and the unmarried man, his concerns lead him to please the Lord. But the married man and woman has divided interests. Right? So Paul, he wants them to be free of concern so that they may live in undivided devotion to the Lord. And so his preference with that rationale was celibacy. When you push that rationale to the limit, it means celibacy. But marriage, though it could tie you up a bit, was not sin, and he was not saying no to it. He was not making a command of it.
Yeah. Well, what happened? I think in the early church then, going on Paul's advice here, you had a lot of. This is probably how in the Catholic Church the priests were not to get married. But what happens, I think, is as time passed, I think people were realizing that, like, some of them weren't really able to do it, and it led them into sin. So this is what Paul is saying, not everybody has the gift of celibacy, right? So, but if you do, he's making a point here that you could better live in also because the time is short, we're gonna passing away, buying property and in all that stuff. Yes, we have to live and survive, and we have to do these things, but we're doing them not as absorbed by them, but with our future in Christ, which is called, that's what we call an eschatological perspective. So Christians are eschatological people then.
Yeah. Right.
Sorry,
That's good.
I was thinking
Yeah.
I was thinking that.
You run out?
No.
Yeah. Right. So if you have a thought, a question, you keep it. Don't let it go.
Yeah.
You could you could feel free to ask it. I think we should be just right to finish the last 4 verses. So if you have a thought there, because that is where the YouTube question came in, it may or may not have been satisfactorily answered. So let's hear how you all feel about what was said so far.
I see that everybody's quiet tonight. I'm not sure what's going on.
That doesn't mean they're not thinking.
Well, actually, one teacher told me that usually when you do your presentation so good, they're trying to absorb what's going on. I could do a comparison between before I was married and now that I'm married in terms of that division, in terms of the devotion to the Lord. And I think many of us who are here who are married can identify in terms of things that we'd like to do, but we are unable to do because of our responsibility in the home.
Right.
It's not that it's any less of or makes us any less of a Christian, because I have a responsibility to my home. That's my first area of ministry. And if I don't do that well, then my witness out in the world, it's not going to be worth anything.
Nice.
So I believe that we need to understand that even married, you have ministry and aspects of ministry that you are involved in. And as unmarried persons, there are aspects of ministries that we can be involved in.
Yes. Yes. Well said. So, verses 36 to 40, let's pick on Sharon for this one. Huh? Sharon, read those for us.
Certainly. Anyone thinks he is acting improperly towards the virgin, he is engaged too. And if she is getting along in years and he feels he ought to marry, he should do as he wants. He is not sinning. They should get married. But the man who has settled the matter in his own mind, who is under no compulsion, but has control over his own will, and who has made up his mind not to marry the virgin, this man also does the right thing.
Yes.
So then, he who marries the virgin does right, but he who does not marry her does even better. A woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives. But if her husband dies, she is free to marry anyone she wishes. But he must belong to the Lord. In my opinion, she is happier if she stays as she is. And I think that I too have the Spirit of God.
And you know, Sharon made the point so well. That is why leaders need to be sensitive to the fact that if somebody's married, you don't want to presume too much of their time. I mean, like I asked Sharon to read that, and I knew that there was a baby on the scene, right? And it was likely that the baby would cry, right? But I forgot that for a moment. But leaders need to keep constantly in mind that the married men are not as, and women are not as free as they used in a case. Boy, it'll be nice if you could be as free as you could, the Lord.
Amen.
So now, who say amen there? So Paul, he brings an end to his argument about the virgins, and he concludes with a final word to married women and widows. So Paul advises that if a celibate man thinks he is acting improperly toward his engaged person, and she is getting old, and he feels he should marry her, it is no sin. That's verse 36. So that whole keeping himself celibate while he is engaged, call it that, it is very possible that whole aesthetic belief, that is that apartness. Now, let me just say something about that word that I'm not pronouncing well. You know, there are some people that have this thing about no law, anything goes. This is the opposite of that. He is keeping himself apart from these things to feel more spiritual about himself. But he is actually grieving his fiancée to death. He's killing that woman. And what is scripture advice in that case?
Get married.
Yeah, get married. If he is acting improperly toward his betrothed, and she is getting old and feels he should marry her, because there's a song that talks about seeing a rose dead on the vine. She may have aspirations of having children. It may be what will make her feel fulfilled, and there you are, just plain spiritual, and you are stretching this thing, and you're taking me beyond the line, over the line. And that would be one example of acting improperly toward that woman. And there are other things that one might say as well. But it seems to be that more on the celibate side, because there are other ways that a person could act improperly to the person he's engaged to be married to. But the passage would seem to suggest more on the abstaining side. But I suppose there are other side too, that he could be, constantly slipping, and needs to, make that decision. Get married.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Verse 37, Paul says, if no one has forced the action on him and he is fully convinced of it, he need not marry. If nobody forcing him to stay celibate and he is fully convinced that God has given me this gift, and I don't want to get married, and I think I'll be more useful in the hands of God, he does well not to get married. And people shouldn't be putting him on no guilt trip and setting him up with date to go out with such and such because they're feeling sorry for him. But he has a gift that you don't have, and stop thinking of him in terms of your gift. If you were in his position, you'd be craving. The guy he's gifted by God to live a celibate life to the honor and glory of God. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. So verse 38. Read verse 38 to me.
So then, right up here. So then he who marries the virgin does right, but he who does not marry her does even better.
So Paul summarizes his view. He's saying, look, marriage is no sin, and make no mistake about that. But remaining unmarried is better. In the crisis will, I suppose, bring further. We need to have that more clearly defined. Just to say that it was not expedient. That we speed into some questions, right? Verse 39. Bring it up.
It's right up there.
Oh, where is it?
A woman.
Right. A woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives. But if her husband dies, she is free to marry anyone she wishes, but he must belong to the Lord. Now you realize the whole kaleidoscope of issues Paul is dealing with related to this marriage subject. To the balance, Paul gives a final word, 1 to 24, by the way, and he is advising the virgins who would be married, marriage is for life. If the husband dies, however, you can marry, but the person must be a believer. The person must be a believer. And then keep it in mind, verse 40, it's she stays as she is. And I think that I too have the Spirit of God. So Paul summarizes his view. He says, stay as you are for the woman whose husband died, emphasizing that it is a spirit-filled judgment, not to be ignored. That there are even advantages, even though you were married, to continue to be single. He's saying there's some value in that.
I think I too have the Spirit of God. Because in my judgment, she's happier if she stays as she is. And I too think that I have the Spirit of God. So although he's saying it's not directly from the Lord, he's emphasizing that it's a spirit-filled judgment, so it should not be ignored.
Yes. Now, I know some thoughts might be going around the mind, so there might be some comments or questions, and then we'll just ask a question about application for today. So, anything stuck out?
Right. Someone was once speaking to me. No, I'm not expert on divorce and remarriage, so I'm here to listen and according. But someone mentioned to me some time ago this portion of scripture that says a woman is bound to her husband as long as she lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to remarry anyone she wishes, but he must be a Christian. So it doesn't matter what the woman is going through in her marriage, however he is behaving, I must be with him until he dies. So even if he separates from me, I will not go for a divorce to remarry and have peace or anything like that. I'm going to be bound to this guy until he dies. And when he dies, I'm going to get married. What are your thoughts?
No, well, there's one other scripture. You have to put scripture and scripture together. So Paul gives here one reason that if the husband is an unbeliever and he leaves, let him leave. You are not bound, and that means you're not bound to the marriage. And that also means if you're not bound to the marriage, a divorce really gives you the freedom to marry again. That's what the divorce did. But there's another very important verse that you must put along with that, which is given in Matthew 19 and Matthew 5.
I'm hearing all of what you're saying.
Okay, so I'm saying that Paul gave one reason in this passage when the woman is not bound. If the unbeliever departs, let him depart. She's not bound to the marriage in that case, which would usually mean the right to remarry. But I'm saying that along with that, you must also put the other scripture, especially what Jesus said. So Jesus said in Matthew 5, that anyone who, what does he say in Matthew 5:19, I think it is?
Except for marital
If
anyone divorces marries another, except for marital unfaithfulness, he commits adultery.
Yeah. Which was it?
Let me
Matthew 5.
That's Matthew 5:31.
Yeah. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress, and anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. So there is another reason here, which is adultery. So adultery also literally breaks the marriage bond. Now, the divorced person in that case has the freedom, if they so choose, to remarry. That's what that scripture is saying. So Jesus gives one exception, Paul gives one exception. So you have to put all those things together. And I think Pastor might even be able to put in a good here as for counseling. There might even be other situations where abusive and stuff like that. So I don't know if Pastor wants to comment on that.
And this is a very interesting topic, especially with the divorce and so on. I know the Bible prescribes divorce for adultery purposes. I know, as in Corinthians, the Bible prescribes if the husband is an unbeliever and he walks out, the person is not bound.
But I don't think they're prescribing it, but they're saying allowed, making an allowance rather than.
But Jesus also said that divorce was only given because of the stubbornness of men's heart, and it was never intended in covenant from God for men to divorce their wives. That it is very, very common today. I'm not sure I'm absolutely sold on divorce and remarriage, but I am sold on situations where people really have to leave, especially where life is threatened in terms of physical abuse, mental abuse, psychological abuse, or even sicknesses transmitted from sexual relationships and so on. Yes, but I'm very traditional when it comes to marriage and the views. The problem I have, Sister Shirley, Brother Lindsay, I find divorce and marriage is too common in the church, and that should not be. It's too common. Divorce and remarriage in the church is too common. And when two believers come together, the covenant is supposed to, and that is why the Bible speaks about husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. He gave, that's an everlasting covenant that he established there with us in faithfulness. And we're supposed to mimic that, the bride and the bridegroom. That is covenant to be established. You know, I know today it happens, but I will leave it there.
That's a whole topic in itself. Because one of those verses that you quoted saying that they allowed divorce because of the hardness of the heart. What that was the divorce for any reason, the demand. But so the man was treating his wife badly, and no, that wasn't the divorce. Very, very badly. He even has another woman and all that, and so he's hard-hearted, right? He's hard-hearted toward his wife. So the better thing to do is to divorce her and give her that freedom to leave rather than to keep her in. So it's because of the hardness of their hearts toward their spouses.
Yeah, and and it is the best standard is to see, and especially if you enter in a relationship, that you enter in it for life. In fact, Paul is actually suggesting that here. But in Jesus, what Jesus said in Matthew 19:9, he says, I tell you that if anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, and marries another, commits adultery.
Adultery, yeah.
And so the exception, in other words, if that condition exists, it's not a hard-hearted reason As the question was asked, right? You have to put up with this, is the Bible suggesting that you have to put up with adultery? And that's why Angela said, maybe not prescribe, and I like to use the word, it's a concession. It's God's grace and it's his biblical attitude. But it's not a command. In fact, try. If you want, try. Accept the sorry. But if the sorry goes on to sorry again and sorry again until it becomes arrogant, then you do have biblical attitude. And
yes.
And so good question, and I think the principle here is, because his emphasis is on one line, it doesn't answer all the questions on marriage per se, because other scriptures actually impact on the believer as well in that subject. However, I want to ask the question, as eschatological people who have a different worldview and are looking forward to the return of the Lord, married or not, what is this passage basically saying to us at the base? What is it saying to us fundamentally?
Nothing matters. Everything is going to go away. If you keep your focus on God, you will be caught up to here. Nothing else matters.
Right. In other words, don't let the world have you so gripped that you're bogged down by worldly love and worldly concerns.
That's right.
I mean, something so beautiful as marriage, you're going to put that second to something else? Well, that something else has to be really wonderful. And we need to know and cherish that something else that is in the Christian life ahead of us. That's a good summary.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's a balance, we are fully in this world, but we are not controlled
by the soul.
By the systems. We have to live fully devoted to the Lord. Oh yeah, and all this we're talking about, like, for example, Jonathan, you asked, you were 18 years old. Should you have said that you weren't going to get married when you became a Christian? So, again, all that Paul is saying here still applies, that the time is short, Jesus could come at any moment, and maybe we need to have that perspective more even as we grow up and decide whether we want to get married or not. But not everybody can do it, and there's also this issue of love, right? If you meet somebody and you fall in love with that person and you really want to spend your life with that person, well, you can serve God very fruitfully together. So, and Paul talks in chapter 5 and what a beautiful thing it is, a relationship between the husband and the wife.
Yes.
So, all in all, you really have to put all scripture together and see what is best for you.
Yeah. So I say, that with a good marriage, 1 + 1 is more than 2.
Yes.
Because each person complements the other in a way that you lift them up and help them to maximize their potential. One guy put it, the dance, a tango. It's like a tango, right? You're together and then you swing her around and she goes and she does a separate dance and you do a separate dance and then you come back and you hold each other again.
Yes.
So that even in ministry, if you have a good marriage, you can have better ministry.
Yes.
It's a really good marriage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually thinking, it was very bad in Corinthian day, the immorality, but I'm actually thinking there's so much immorality around these days. It's really safer to get married, huh?
So don't be controlled by the world system and don't hoard things around yourself as if life consists in the abundance of things possessed. And you see the way you all give worldly goods, that really does say something, because you could really hoard it for yourself, but you want it to be a blessing to others. And that's what the heart of this passage is. Let that be the motivating force. What is ahead and what you're doing for the kingdom of God, for the betterment of others. So we had time. Sorry for taking you over.
No,
Okay. That's great.
Okay, thank you very much, Sister Angela and Brother Lindsay. I know we only covered chapter 7. Keep them and post them. You could post them in the chat here. You can forward them to myself, and we would try to help address the questions that we have, especially those who are listening in on YouTube. And I want to encourage those who haven't put up a picture or video yet of the people here, but we want to get to know each other as we continue this study.
yeah.
So before we officially close tonight, Sister Vani, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
And you close us in prayer, please.
Sure. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we give you all honor and praise and glory, O God. Father, we thank you, O God, for this time, O God, where we can come together, O God, and learn of you, O God. Father, we thank you, O God, for Brother Lindsay and Sister Shirley, O God, and especially, O God. We pray, O God, that you continue to use them, O God, to further your word, O God. Father, I thank you, O God, for every ear that was listening, O God. I pray, O God, that Father, you will bless everyone, O God, and keep them, O God. Father, as we dismiss here, O God, we ask that you continue to be us, O God. Continue to protect us and keep us, O God, in your name, O God. Father, we thank you, O God, that we will continue to go into your word, O God, and learn more about you, O God. Just continue to bless us and keep us in your mighty and precious name we pray. Amen.